Thanks for joining our webinar. We're going to get started. Before we do, I'm going to go over a few details about the webinar. And so the first one is if you have any issues or technical problems during the webinar, please hit the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. If you're having an issue and you hit that button, one of our event coordinators, Liz, will reach out to you with a private message and help you with the problem that you're having. If you have any questions during the webinar, please go ahead and write those questions into the Q&A board. We will likely not get to those questions until the end of the webinar, but we'll be monitoring the Q&A, and then we'll address all the questions that you have by the end of the webinar. You may be wondering, because some people wonder this when they enter the webinars, am I the only person here? Am I the only attendee of the webinar? You are not. We have the attendees set to private, so you cannot see the other attendees that are in the webinar. And if you need to leave, we all understand that things happen, and that's perfectly fine. We'll be sending a recording of the webinar to you after the webinar is finished. So you'll still have the ability to watch the entire thing through in your own time. And the goal for this webinar is to have approximately 45 minutes and then QA. So that's how long the webinar will last. All right. So really quickly, I'm going to also show you who is actually in this webinar presenting, and then just tell you a little bit about Jax itself. So the people you have that are going to be talking are Liz Thompson. She is the marketing and events manager for Jax and Revecast. You have myself, Andrew Purpura. I'm the CEO and chief technologist of Jax and Revecast. And then you have Mark Coburn, who's the chief product officer of Revecast, and he was responsible for the development of the product that we're demoing today. And so you've heard me say a couple times now, Jax Consulting and Revecast. And so you might be wondering how those companies are related. And so Jax is a services company and is the parent company of Revecast. Revecast is a product company that is a Jax Consulting company. So it actually is the same team members, and we are essentially one and the same. It's just the product arm of Jax Consulting. Jax itself is a services business that specializes in implementing companies onto the Salesforce platform. We're a nationally recognized company. We're in the Inc. 5000. We're a disabled veteran-owned business. And in the Salesforce ecosystem, we are a summit partner in Navigator Expert, which is the highest credentials that you can have as a partner in the Salesforce ecosystem. Both Jax and Revecast have an App Exchange listing where they're both rated 5 out of 5 by our customers, and we are actually the #1 Agentforce partner in the ecosystem. We're going to be showing you in this webinar the Revecast PSA tool, but I wanted to show you that we actually have at Revecast an entire product suite. And so today, the PSA tool, which we will focus on, it specializes in project management, resource planning, time tracking, invoicing, utilization management of resources. But the products are interconnected and they're standalone. So we sell each of these products standalone, but they're also connected as well. So for example, if you're using the PSA tool and you've realized that with the pipeline you have coming of projects, that you don't have the correct utilization for your projects or the right skill sets for your projects, you can then open a job in Revecast Recruiter to find the right candidates to hire into your organization. It uses intelligent resume parsing, candidate scoring, skills matching, etc. And then once you have your operations set up, if you then need to integrate your PSA data or your recruitment data into an ERP system or HR system or finance system, we offer Revecast Connect to be the integration layer with seamless and out-of-the-box integrations to those systems. So all of the products are standalone, but also completely integrated so that there's an entire suite of products that helps free your people to do the work that they want to be doing that only the humans can be doing. So before we get into the demo, I want to first also stress the importance and common theme of why traditional PSA systems sometimes fail. So many times a company starts with the right intentions when they're purchasing or implementing a PSA tool, and they're hoping that it's finally going to bring their business processes together. But the what actually ends up happening when you purchase a PSA tool is it generally just ends up being another disconnected, disparate system in your tech stack. It doesn't talk to your CRM. It doesn't talk to your finance tools. It's not involved in your sales process. It may be advertised in such a way that maybe there's an integration or connector to Salesforce or to your HR invoicing. But the reality is those are typically very rigid and limited. So what ends up naturally happening is companies fall back into spreadsheets. It's what they're familiar with. So you start tracking time, you start tracking projects, you start tracking forecast in Google Sheets, Excel sheets. And the reality is once you're putting things into spreadsheets, they're out of date, right? You don't have that real-time visibility into the data. You're always reacting on old data, basically. And so you end up with essentially disconnected systems and disconnected teams. And so that is essentially the reason and the purpose of Revecast. So we have one connected system unified in Salesforce. You have one source of truth. And so you're always acting on real-time, most relevant data. And this kind of leans in directly to the story of why Revecast PSA was created and how it was created. So Jax Consulting, our services arm, which has been growing very rapidly, we had a PSA tool that we were using. The reality is that as we grew and as we became a larger organization, it was limiting us and hurting us eventually more than it was helping us. And we started to realize that it just couldn't do the things that we needed to do. It couldn't give us the reports that we needed. So I mean, even just something as general as tell us, does the sold revenue match our delivery capacity? We could not generally get those reports out of our PSA tool. Or do we've sold the projects, have we scheduled our delivery team to the same amount of revenue as what the contract said? We couldn't get reports like that also. So what we ended up doing is we were exporting the data into spreadsheets, and we were doing a lot of this externally outside of our PSA tool, and it just made our operations incredibly reactive. So we had to pull the data out, work on putting all the data together in Excel reports, and then we would have to have meetings to talk about it, right? So it was just very manual, time consuming, and it was very a reactive process. So in this journey, we kind of decided we needed a different tool. And so we ended up evaluating about 10 products, and then we started talking to other service firms that were using these products. And so we realized that everyone had essentially the same issues with their PSA tools that we were having. And so ultimately, we ended up deciding to build our own, right? We didn't want to have the trade-offs. So we built our own product. And in the first month, the MVP version of our product ended up producing an increase of 25% utilization and an increase of 30% in revenue. And we didn't add any new sales projects that magically increased our revenue. It was literally the same projects we were running the month prior. We just didn't have the correct staffing to the projects, and it just wasn't visible to us until we put the tool into the system because it gave us more visibility. So we immediately increased our revenue, and then our revenue continued to increase from there the more we used the tool. So now we were acting on the live data, seeing it happen in real time rather than this incredibly manual process that we had. And so with that story, I then now want to pass it off to Mark to actually give you a demo of Revecast PSA and show you a little bit of the things that it can do.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am going to start off with a mythical consulting firm, and that mythical consulting firm's scenario of how many hours do they have as a total capacity? How many hours in that total capacity has actually been scheduled with active projects? And then we want to look, in addition to that, we want to see the pipeline. So here we're starting with just the active projects. On our first component, we have our total capacity across all team, across all roles by month and by role. If I then drill in a little bit more, I see by week, by role, and then I can go even deeper to see project manager by week. I can see solution architect by week. I can see consultant by week. Now, that's great, but what we want to see now is, okay, that's great. Now we want to see pipeline. So I want to see the total pipeline across all of the pipeline, across all verticals, across all roles. What does that look like? Overall by month, overall by week, by individual roles, project manager, architect, and consultant. If what I really want, though, at the end of the day is I want to see both in one view. I want to see active projects plus pipeline together in one view. How are we doing? From an overview perspective, this is critical information to operations. Do we have enough projects? Do we have too many projects? Do we have the right roles and the right skill sets, or do we need to hire? In addition, I can drill in and say, okay, I just want to see those opportunities, those potential projects that are 50% or above, etc. I can play with these numbers. I can look at this data. I can see how this affects our overall month over month, week over week, based on role, role, role.
And I will say from a differentiator, and from something different that we saw across other tools, the ability to overlay the pipeline onto the existing utilization is pretty significant because you can essentially do a what if scenario of if I have these committed projects, what does our utilization look like? And this is just an example of how connected our sales process is to our delivery process.
And to that point, how does the data show up here in the first place? Well, that journey starts with our sales process or anyone's consulting firm sales process. And we're going to start with Gemini State Community College. And at this point in the story, I am a salesperson and I have started conversations with this community college, and I need to start a new opportunity. So this is going to be Gemini State Community College R&A implementation. So recruitment and admissions implementation. I think that we can close this at the end of the month. And right now we have had basic conversations only. So we were just in qualification. And this is a new business. I want an implementation. I believe this is just pretty initial at this point, but I believe that we probably can start after the break in early January, and we're going to go for 6 months. And I'm going to start with an even split. What we're generating here is just the foundation, the baseline of an opportunity that will turn into more as we move through time. Right now, we don't have price yet, and that is because we have not yet added any products or resources. That's our next step. So we have a conversation with the client. We start writing a proposal. We go through our estimation process. We have kind of dialed in the total number of hours per roles. We know basically what those roles need to be. And we're going to start now adding those roles. So just like you would at any other on any other opportunity, we're going to choose our roles. In this case, I want project manager. I want solution architect. I want a marketing consultant, and I want a Salesforce consultant. Here then, I need to fill in the dates. It's not necessary that everybody starts at the exact same time. Some people will start a little earlier than others. Let's say, for example, our first person, the project manager, they're going to start a week earlier, we're estimating, than the actual start date. Okay, great. And we're going to go for 6 months. So January, February, March, April, May, June. So we're going to go to 6/26/2026. This end date then will be the end date for all 4 of these folks, but the start date is going to be a little different. So I think that the project manager is going to start on 12/29 and the architect is going to start on 12/29, but the marketing consultant is not going to start on that date. I think that person is going to start 2 weeks later. This first week will be initiation, getting some discovery done. This will be more discovery. This person we think is going to start here, and they're going to do some of the baseline marketing discovery. The consultant themselves, we think that they're not actually going to start until yet another week later. At that point now, we have kind of almost a ramp up through the days. Okay, and on average, how many hours per week do we think each of these are going to be? Project manager, I'm thinking 12 based on our estimate. Solution architect, I'm thinking 30. Marketing cloud consultant, there's not that much, so 15, but our Salesforce consultant is going to be high, 40 hours. Now, how do we get to our total quantity? We're essentially going to assume that 20 hours times 6 months, and we're going to assume around 4 weeks in a month. That gives a generic 480. And then we're going to do that same logic and that same math for each of the others. This is going to be 720, 15, 360, and 40 is 960. Okay. At this point now, we have our baseline foundation for the resource plan that we need, the number of hours per week, the dates when they're going to start, when they're going to end, and eventually I have my sales price, my list price. I will then have my total price calculated at the end. So once we save, we now have all of that information added to the system, and I can start viewing details. One, I can see the overall price. Two, I can see the gross margin. I can see the estimated gross margin overall. And if I drill in a little more, I can see, I can give additional information about the line description. And most importantly, if I go look at the individual project that was auto-generated based on this opportunity and the products that I just added, I see that the project has been added, I see that a default team has been added, and I see that default schedules have all been added. Those default schedules then are what's going to start us off. This then is what that would look like from a resource perspective, which then immediately affects this. So as the sales team is doing their work, just day-to-day operations, immediately we're seeing the results over here. So as long as they're keeping their data up to date, we are seeing it in real time. Okay. In addition, in our story, we want to also now have a conversation with the client. The client may say to us, you know what, we need to adjust the prices. So in this case, we're going to take a look at these prices, and they're saying, nope, we need to reduce this a little bit. We want to reduce the scope. Okay. So they are essentially not a huge impact, but they are essentially reducing a little bit, which means that we're going to move this back 2 weeks. So each of these is going to move back 2 weeks, which then reduces your total quantity. So this is now going to be 440. This is now going to be 660. This is now going to be 330. This is now going to be 880, which once we run this again, it's going to immediately again recalculate those schedules, recalculate the price, and we're again back in the place where we have our total price, we have our estimated gross margin, and estimated gross margin percent. Okay, at this point, the client is going to agree to this, and great, we're going to go ahead and say this is closed won. At this point, the conversation changes. It's now a conversation between the sales folks and moving it to the delivery folks, and we're going to now start having a conversation around knowledge transfer. So the project team is now going to take over. They're going to start filling in details like project budget, total number of hours that we have for this project. They're going to start thinking about their start and end date, when exactly they want to plan that kickoff date, etc. They're also going to start talking about their work streams. Work stream is a concept that is intentionally flexible. It is intentionally meant to be something that each individual project team can create their own structure, their own hierarchy based on conversations with the client. Maybe they want to track things financially in one way or another. That's great. We can accommodate. Perhaps they want to break things up exactly based on the SOW or slightly differently. It is up to the end users to create their work streams. In our case, we're going to just make sure that the basics are done. I need to control whether or not this is an active work stream, because some of them are not active. Perhaps they are time entry, i.e. that this work stream is something that someone could bill against, and then whether or not it is an internal and non-billable work stream, or is it a billable work stream. In addition, we need to set the reviewers for any given work stream. We need to set who is the first reviewer and who is the second reviewer for that particular work stream. The reason why this is important is as we run into the invoicing stage of the process, we need to make sure that all the time entries are reviewed. The architect is going to review them, and the project manager is going to review them so that when we get to the time of invoicing, things are seamless. Okay. In addition, we also would need to assign our teammates. So, for example, we want this team member to be Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock is going to be our project manager, and I will be the architect in this case. Okay. All of this to say, as we run through, this particular project team is now going to take start adding their own information, their own value. They're going to set up their own Slack channel. They're going to set up their own documentation. They're going to adjust their schedules. They're going to start adding time as we go through the process of the project. But super importantly, they may want to set up a connection between this particular project and Jira. We have a connector. I'm going to now change gears to a project that is already underway. And this particular project, BrightPath Managed Services, we have created a Jira board. So this is a month into this project. This particular project has gone through and, as a part of discovery, created their stories, created their user stories, their proposed solutions, their acceptance criteria, everything. And that person then, that team then is able to manage their work here in Jira, just like any other project team. And they are then, as long as they go install our Revecast PSA from the app, from the Atlassian App Exchange, they can make a connection between their Jira instance or client's Jira instance to our PSA. So I can come in here and I can choose whatever projects I want from my Jira instance or whichever Jira instance this is installed in. I can then choose what project do I want to configure? I'm going to load issue types. This then gives me my list of the standard Jira issue types: task, epic, subtask, and story. And then for each individual one of these issue types, I can choose which fields I want to send from Jira to Salesforce and which I do not want to send from Jira to Salesforce. At which point I have now made a connection between Jira and Salesforce, and I can do individual mapping. If you have custom fields in Jira, that is okay. We just need a matching field on the PSA side, and we can match that all up. So when we come back to this particular board, and we see that, let's go ahead and just kind of go through. Here we are, optimize project level financial calculations. We've just moved it into in progress. If I come back over to this side and refresh, we're getting real-time stories moving from Jira into Salesforce. And as I can view this particular screen, I can see what is happening on any given story. I can configure each of these fields. I get to declare which ones I want to see based on the project. You can project by project declare what you want to see or what you don't want to see. You can project by project declare what columns you want to see, so you can match it up to what's happening on the Jira side. All of that to say is, as you're going through, you just do your project work in Jira just like you would any other time, and it immediately reflects over on the Salesforce side. As long as you've made that connection, as long as you've built it in that way, then it immediately disappears from our in progress and it's over here and done, because that's what I just did on the Jira side. Now, if you're using Jira for this Kanban, you would not want to move things on the PSA side. You do it on this side and let it reflect in Salesforce. However, if you're not using Jira, you can just use this and move them as you need. So for example, I want to move this one over to this side. You can do that if you're not using Jira. I can also do a search. So let's say I want to see all the things that I've said refine to. I can start seeing all those items in this list. And this is then how you would create the details of your work streams and immediately see all those work streams coming in. Okay.
I did just want to highlight something important that Mark said in there, just to highlight it. What he just showed you is that you have the option of using the project management tools inside of our PSA tool, or if you would rather use something like Jira to run your project management, you could use that as your primary source for project management. So we're giving you both options.
That's right. In addition, what we have on this project is this project has started in early October. So we already have schedules and we already have some time entries that have been added. I want to go look at this from the project management point of view. I want to see what has been happening on this project. I want to see who's on it, what their role is, what the start date was, what the end date was. I want to see how many hours did each person work in this week, in this week, in this week, and how many hours do we have scheduled into the future? And importantly, what are we assigning them to? So coming back to our work streams, what did they log against? Each one of these work streams shows what they are logging against and what they will log against if they don't choose a different work stream. In addition, I can change. So let's say, for example, I don't want this to be 5 hours. I want this to be 7 hours. And I don't want it to be this work stream. I want it to be that work stream. I can then just in this screen very easily change relevant numbers. This then allows me to keep track of how far, what are we assigning to each person and what should they be doing week over week. In addition, other things that I can see is I can see who has taken days off. I can see who has requested days off into the future that would affect my project. I now need to take a look at this and see Well, if we accept this particular day off request, then we're going to need to potentially reduce that person's number of hours for this project. So I can do this all from this one screen. In addition, we can see details about what our basic plan was for each of these weeks. As we move through time, we have a basic plan for each week. This then allows the project manager and the project team to kind of easily keep track of what is what and what is happening on this project. Okay. Now, I am I now have been assigned. I am one of the team members for this project, so there's me right there. So if I were going to log time, I need to go to my time entry screen. Here's my time entry screen. Here is the time that I've logged so far against this particular project. Let's say that I don't want 3.5. Let's say that I don't like that one. I want to recreate it. I'm going to create a brand new one, and it wasn't 3.5, it was 3.75. I worked on Jira integration, and it was great. Okay, so as I'm adding this time, this is just makes it that easy, really, really easy for me to keep track of my time. In addition, if I so choose, I can use the timer. I can have the timer kick off whenever I want, and it'll start timing as I decide that I want to time against any given project. Some people really like that, some people don't. Now, note, I will not be allowed to submit this. At the end of the week, we ask, we recommend everybody submits their time, but you'll notice I have not actually logged all my time. It knows this, it will not let me log this time. It's saying, no, you can't do that. You're not done. You haven't logged your minimum. At the end of this, after all of this, we now have the ability to see at the project management level, how are we doing against the budget? So if I'm the project manager and I need to see what is my financial situation for this project? Well, I can see that the total project budget was 232,800. I can see that a total scheduled amount is 249. I can see that so far we've logged, not yet invoiced and billed, but logged 35,810. In the future, i.e., this day forward, we have this many hours scheduled. And when you combine this plus this, we are 16,630 over the amount of dollars that we actually have. That is where the project manager says to themselves, no, we have to have a conversation. Either we're overscheduled, we have too many things in scope. We now need to have a conversation internally and potentially with the client. This is the easy way to keep track of, okay, how much money do we have? Where are we? How much do we have remaining? As long as we have our story points and things up to date in Jira, things start to just work. In addition, we have a report engine. One way to see and just make easy reports for us is a admin friendly or even an end user friendly way to create dynamic reports, clickable reports. I want to see the finance sales versus delivery report. What this one does is it shows us that original assumption, the original assumption that we had from sales. So that original assumption, back on our opportunity here. These are the assumptions that we had from sales. This is what's actually happening.
So just to clarify, what's happening is we're selling on the opportunity a total contract value, and our tool is amortizing it over the time period into revenue forecasts. And so it's then giving you a basis to compare against your delivery projects to see, are you following the sales assumption that finance may see, and how does it compare to you can look sales versus scheduled versus actual comparison.
Yep, that's exactly what this is. So this is sales versus delivery schedule versus actuals. What actually happened in that month? Were we on track or were we not on track? Okay. At this point, now we are into the new month. People have logged their time. We are now ready to put together our invoice, which we need to do month over month. So I, against this project, am going to go to my invoices. I'm going to see that in this case, this particular project paid us a 25,000 signing, essentially a down payment. We're going to compare against that as we go. I'm going to go to the individual month of October and I'm going to run my invoice. What this is going to do is it's going to search across this project and this date range. It's going to find any and all time entry records that are billable time entry records. It's going to consolidate them. I'm then going to determine whether or not I need to associate that invoice with a purchase order, assuming you are using purchase orders. In this case, this Bright Path is using purchase orders. I'm going to go next. It's going to show me the folks who actually had time, billable time in this month. I'm going to run my invoice. I'm then going to get my invoice line items, i.e. one per person per month. And I'm going to get invoice contacts, which are those folks that we have identified prior to be the people at the individual client that should receive any notifications or any information about invoices. When I go next, we are now going to see that we have an invoice record. And this invoice then is our total billable hours across all of our people, total dollar based on the rates, based on everything that has already happened. Each one of those invoice lines, you could break it down. You could see absolutely every time entry that's in here and the dollar amounts if you want it. You can see those invoice contacts here. Those invoice contacts then are the ones that are going to receive automatic notifications when we take our next step. So if I'm the project manager in this moment, I already know that there was a prepayment of 25,000. So I know that I can't charge them 26,290. I actually have to give them essentially a discount because they've already paid 25,000. So if they've already paid 25,000, we're really only going to invoice them for this amount. So when we go to the next step and we notify finance team that this individual invoice is ready to invoice, the finance team comes in, they look at it, and they say, great, we're going to go ahead and we're going to invoice. When invoice occurs, this is the point in time when we, via an integration in Revecast Connect, we connect to your financial system, QuickBooks, Sage, etc. We're going to create an invoice in the financial system. We're going to create products for each one of the invoice project members. We're going to create invoice line items for each of these invoice line items. We're going to have a total dollar amount. We're going to send them two separate emails, one which is going to contain the details of the individual time entries, and one that is going to contain the actual invoice itself. That invoice then is going to be received by the end users, and then they pay. I won't go into detail, but there's also a finance app that the finance team can use to keep track of all those invoices and when they're paid and when they're not paid. The system will automatically update this invoice record once it goes to paid. Okay. Once we're through that, the last thing and really important thing is how do we monitor week over week? As we're going through the project weeks, I want to see how are we doing week over week. So we have a concept called project week. And project weeks allow us to do a couple of things. One, it allows the PM and the project team to plan ahead. Okay, I want to know what we're doing in this week. What is my plan for that week? What is my plan for that week? I also want to see summaries from past weeks. So as we end a week, I want to see a summary. I want to put together a summary. How did we do? This essentially turns into then a status report. And because we have all of our data coming into Salesforce. We have our user stories if we're doing a Jira integration. We have our schedules. We have our time entries. We have our emails. We have our Firefly meeting recordings. We have our Slack messages. We have a myriad of data points. All of this allows us to use the power of AI and the power of Agentforce to create scores, i.e. project health and risk scores, overall risk scores, customer sentiment, delivery risk scores, etc. And as we move through time, we would then get auto-generated scores based on what we're seeing on the project, what the data is saying on the project, and we would then have the ability to see as we go on the project level, okay, where are we now? How are we doing? Are we on track? What's our risk tolerance, our risk amount? How are we doing on these scores? Are we okay? Are we not okay? And if you take this one step up, if you're a manager, if you're a delivery director, if you're an executive, you also want to know, great, well, that's awesome for one project, but I want to see it overall. How are we doing across all of those projects that are currently being worked on? This is then the view that we can start seeing how are we doing across all of our projects, across everything. Are we on track? Are we not on track? Where do we need to engage? Where do we not need to engage? Where are things okay? And with that, I will pass it.
Yeah, and just one last thing on that comment, I just want to highlight that it's even giving us not just a risk score where the project is, but it's also giving us customer sentiment, which is incredibly important because customers are the most important thing to the business. So it tells us where there's issues, where we need to direct more of our leadership's attention. And so that essentially solves the problem of scale of a services business.
Awesome.
All right. So I'm going to
Share.
take control back of the screen. And I just want to thank you, Mark, for giving such a good demo. I did want to elaborate that he didn't have the time to show everything in the most amount of detail. There's a lot of things to show, right? So there's a few things we couldn't show, and one of those was our analytics, right? So we talked a lot about bringing the data into Salesforce, having one source of truth. And so I did just want to highlight that this tool has a out of the box starting templates for reports and dashboards for each one of the personas of the business that would be involved. So if you're finance and you want to see how the revenue is expected to amortize over the year, you can see that for the forecasting. If you're delivery managers, you can see utilization. You can see if you're hitting the revenue targets that we have. If you're an individual project manager, you can see metrics about the project. So we have the different personas and dashboards involved with each of the different personas that would be using the product. Then lastly, I wanted to just tell you what to do if you're interested in more, right? So if you want to have a personal demo, if you want to ask additional questions, the best point of contact for you would be Maria Smirnova. She is our account executive for Revecast. And so if you have any questions, please reach out to her and she can help you with next steps. And with that, I'll hand it off to you, Liz, for the Q&A.